Hello, everyone. We are going to start the presentation. My name's Samantha Kulish-Fargione, and I am the Programs and Educational Coordinator for the Norwalk Historical Society. On behalf of our Executive Director, Diane Jelleret, there she is, and we'd like to welcome you all to this evening's presentation. Before we begin, we have a few important reminders. We are recording this lecture, and we will make it available on the Norwalk Historical Society's website, our YouTube page, and on our Facebook page. And we will also be emailing it out to all of you. Once again, we kindly ask that you keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off during the presentation. Now, if you're seeing a bunch of little squares all over the screen, you can change your Zoom screen view to speaker view. That way you will only be looking at the presenter and the slides. That function can be found at the top right of your screen if you are using a desktop or laptop, or at the top left of your screen if you're using an iPad or tablet device. We will have a question and answer session at the end of both presentations this evening, and we will use the chat feature to run the Q&A. So many of you know where that chat feature is. However, in case you just joined us, if you're using a desktop or laptop, the chat feature is the speech bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. You simply click the speech bubble and you can type in your question. For those using an iPad or a tablet, you're going to tap the three dots at the top right corner of your screen, and that will bring down a menu, and then you just tap on the word chat. Diane Jelleret, our Executive Director, will be moderating the Q&A at the end and will read the questions out to our presenters. If you'd like to help the Norwalk Historical Society continue its community programming, please consider making a donation at the end of the lecture tonight. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and you can visit our website, norwalkhistoricalsociety.org, to donate or to become a member. In honor of Black History Month, the Norwalk Historical Society is pleased to host tonight's lecture, Honoring the Silent, Documenting African American and Native American History in Connecticut, with guest presenters Dennis Culliton, founder and executive director of the Witness Stones Project, and Dr. Katherine Hermes, director of Uncovering Their History, Africans, African Americans, and Native Americans in Hartford's ancient burying ground, 1640 to 1815. Now, I just want to give everyone a little information about our presenters this evening. Dennis Culliton entered the adult world joining the Marines before attending college at UMass, studying anthropology and economics. From there, he became a contract negotiator in the federal government before attending Quinnipiac University, graduating with a MAT in history. He spent a quarter century of teaching history in public schools. The Witness Stones Project started in 2017 and has now spread to over a dozen communities in 3 northeastern states, reaching more than 2,000 students. Dr. Katherine Hermes teaches at Central Connecticut State University in the History Department. Her courses include Anglo-American legal history and Native Americans of the Eastern Woodlands, as well as others on early America and digital history. She is the co-author with Alexandra Marivel of several articles and book chapters on Native American history in New England, and the author of book chapters on Native legal history. Well, now that we know a little bit about our speakers, Mr. Culleton will begin the presentation this evening, followed by Dr. Hermes.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Samantha and Diane, for hosting us tonight. I was looking over at the audience, and some old friends, of course, but a lot of new names from all around the country. So you guys must have the best mailing list out there. So it's very exciting for me to bring the project, although we're already in Fairfield County, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But so I want to tell you about the Witness Stones Project. It's mostly a school-based project where we work to engage the students in the primary documents to restore the history and honor the humanity of the enslaved people who lived in our communities. I want to start out with a land acknowledgement, and I use this map from native-land.ca. It says Norwalk stands on Sinaway, Wappinger, and Munsee Lenape land. I'd like to acknowledge our neighboring indigenous nations, the Pequannoks and Pugusses to the east, the Mohicans to the north, the Lenni Lenape to the west, and the Mentinicok and Nissisiquog to the south. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. I've been presenting a little bit recently, and you know, it's hard to tell the story of Connecticut slavery without understanding our raison d'etre, why we're here. People settled New England, people settled the Northeast, oftentimes and especially to trade with other places, to provide foodstuffs and wood products and manufactured goods, especially to the sugar plantations in the West Indies, and from that wealth built these communities that we know and love today. I live in Guilford, Connecticut, and we have these beautiful houses surrounding our 8-acre green. And probably a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago, I started a presentation saying that these houses, these big 2- and 3-story houses, aren't here because people sold hay to each other. It's because they were trading, you know, day one, subsistence farming, you know, they were making enough to survive. Day two, they were filling vessels with the surplus labor and materials from this neck of the woods to feed and clothe and provide barrels for and horses, tens of thousands of horses for the West India trade. So it's something for us to think about as we think about why slavery happened here. There's some foundational works. Some of the ones I love the most are certainly Complicity, written about 15 years ago by Ann Farrell, Joel Lang, and Jennifer Frank. Talks about how the North promoted, prolonged, and profited from slavery. It's a very accessible book. If you haven't read it yet, I believe everybody in Connecticut, everybody in the Northeast ought to read that book. We also have a book, Slavery Before Race, that talks about both the indigenous and African slavery at the eastern tip of Long Island. And if you know the history of the eastern end of Long Island, it was part of Connecticut. So it really gets blends into our Connecticut history, especially the areas around Southold and the Hamptons and places like that. So how people there were trading with the West Indies, and their plantations there were feeding the plantations in the slave plantations in the South. And then recently, Christy Clark-Pajara wrote a book called Dark Work, The Business of Slavery in Rhode Island, that just elevates that story of the North supplying products for the West Indies. And we know later on the North was supplying axes and hoes and all these other products for the southern plantation, Southern America, you know, the southern colonies. But early on, we were, again, making our money trading with the West Indies. Local evidence of West India trade from the sundry advancements of the sloop Juno with Eli Foote and Guilford. Eli happened to be the grandfather of Harriet Beecher Stowe. We can see a listing, oftentimes it looks like a consignment listing of items. So we have 700 pounds of beef and tallow, so that's beef in the barrel. We have bushels of corn and oats, 4,600 red oak barrel staves, pressed hay, 3 horses, 1 ox. So we had, I like to say, we had beef on the hoof and beef in the barrel, and additionally 4,600 culling staves. So these barrel staves were an important thing because people were filling them with molasses and sugar and sometimes rum, and that's what we were trading with us in the West Indies. So how do we remember the formerly enslaved here in Connecticut? Sometimes we find grave markers, very rarely. So in Guilford, we have 2 grave markers, both for a man named Shem. I believe it's 2 men. I'm discussing with my friends whether in Guilford, whether it's the same Shem or 2 different people, but we believe, and that's in North Guilford. That's the only stones that we know of. In Greenwich, we have the stones for Hester Mead and her mother, Candace Bush. There may be other stones in Greenwich, but these are stones that we've identified as we're doing work with the Greenwich Historical Society to restore the stories of enslaved people who lived at the Bush Holly House. We have places, some places have been renamed. So N-Word Lane in Guilford is now named North Street, and Milford's Niggs Pond is now named Walker Pond. And Soweek Rocks in Brantford is now named Negro, what used to be named Negro Heads is now named after a sachem of, I believe, the Quinnipiac tribe. Now, the problem with naming a place North Street is we no longer remember that African Americans lived in that neighborhood. So they, in a sense, they've been erased. We don't want to use the N-word, but they have been erased. Milford did a little bit better job because they've changed the name of a pond and now named it after the first African American preacher in Milford. So they've used it to memorialize an African American preacher. So we still remember African Americans lived in that neighborhood, and so now the pond has been renamed and not the name hasn't been erased. So less obvious places to find enslaved people. Well, we can look at things like Chains Unbound. Jeffrey Mead from Greenwich extracted all the manumission or emancipation documents from the property records in the Greenwich Historical Society. You could also find them online. It's a great place to find information, who was holding the enslaved people in captivity, when they were freed. A lot of the freedoms were associated with a 1792 law, which indemnified the enslavers from having to take care of enslaved people in their old age. So there's some economics to that, but we're not going to get in too much detail. We have anecdotes. So Lyman Beecher, who grew up in North Guilford, talks about the enslaved people there. We have other books with anecdotes, and I'm sure in Norwalk, you would have similar types of documents. And sometimes you know, as a researcher, you make your own documents. So if there's researchers out there, we could look at something like this document, if it comes up. And what I did is I took something called the Burgess Bill of Mortality, where two men wrote down everybody who died in Guilford, which also includes Madison, over a 100-year period. And what I did is I extracted out all the people of color. So starting out, that tan color are indigenous people. And then if we look a little further on, we can see a purplish color, and that's people who were identified as Negroes. And we can also look at this bluish color as somebody who was identified as mulatto. Now, one of the things when I share this with students, one of the things they jumps out at them is, although we know the name of the enslavers, oftentimes we don't know the names of the enslaved. And how dehumanizing is that? How awful is that, especially when we're dealing with adults, when we have adult people, a Negro man for Josiah Fowler. Or if we know Josiah Fowler owned him, we pretty much could guess society knew what his name was too, but they chose not to list their name. So we could see in Guilford and Madison that over time, the indigenous people in the 1740s and 1750s, the indigenous people were the most common groups of people of color dying in Guilford. And later on, Blacks, people colored or Negroes were the most common people of color that were dying in Guilford. So we can see information like that. And that's something, again, that you can create if you look at your own documentation that way. Evidence of slavery in church and vital records. Church records are a wonderful place if your congregational church or Anglican/Episcopal church kept those types of records. You go to Middletown, you could find hundreds and hundreds of enslaved people listed through their baptism, owning the covenant, deaths and burials. These things are all listed. Marriages and things like that are listed. Other churches, other congregational churches, no listings for people of color or African Americans. In Greenwich, unlike other parts of Connecticut, many of the enslaved people took on the name of the enslavers. So Culleton took on the name of the Bush family. He had been enslaved by David Bush. So here is an earlier time where David Bush's enslaved people are being listed here. You can see there's a Cull here. Well, Cull becomes Cull Bush, and Cull's son becomes Cull Bush Jr. So we can see that sometimes we have to look where the names are, but a more common place to look, and it's a very rich place to look, is in the back of vital records, in the back of church records. You look at the place where there is no surname, where people don't have a last name. And oftentimes that's where you'll find the enslaved people. And if you're lucky, it'll give you the name of the enslavers too. And that way you have an opportunity to find property records and probate records and other records. So we have been able to, in East Haven, which is now, this part of East Haven is now New Haven, we were able to find that residents of the Party Morris house, or captives at the Party Morris house, Pink and Stepna, were freed by Captain Morris and by another man later on. So we can see that even though they were married in 1791, by 1800, they had both been freed under that 1792 law. So even though they had no last names, we were able to look in the property records under Amos Morris, who we know this captain is Captain Amos Morris, and that allowed us to find additional records. And later on, we found that Pink and Stepna acquired a last name, which was Primus, and that allowed us to follow them through the rest of their lives through property records and other documentation. Connecticut colonial census, we believe the 1774 census is the high tide of slavery in Connecticut. It was before the American Revolution. The importation of Africans was still allowed, and what ended up happening is that Connecticut, again, we have this high tide mark. This number here in New Haven County of 925 enslaved people, black, what they call Black people, and total Blacks, and included the indigenous people. And if you subtract out, I can't do this in my head, so have 28 and 27, so 55. If you subtract 55 people from this number, then you would have a total of Africans or African Americans in New Haven County. And out of that, we believe in 1774, a large percentage of that number was, so 875 African or African Americans in 1774. We would believe a large percentage of those would have been enslaved. Looking closer to home, we can see here in that same census, Norwalk had about 136 enslaved people in the 1774 census. And this is something I just found, I hadn't seen this before, which is the return on the number of inhabitants of the state of Connecticut. So this is now United States, state of Connecticut, 1782, and also Indians and Negroes. So if you look at this 136 number, it would fit into, later on, I think if we look at 1782, there were 132 Blacks and Indians in Norwalk. So the numbers are a little bit different, but we can't break out the Blacks and the Indians from that because we don't have the town by town listing. So we can see the numbers staying pretty steady of Blacks. We know that after the American Revolution, when immigration was opened up, that's many people in New England, and especially, and in Connecticut, would rather hire an Irish or a Welsh or a Scotsman for a short period of time, maybe during the harvest season or during the summer, than hold somebody in captivity all year long and then be responsible for them in their old age. So it was what do we call it now with Uber or something like that? We'd rather, instead of hiring a driver for our lives, we keep a driver for a short period of time. Well, that's kind of what was going on. So there, that type of economy had started at that point, which sometimes made holding an enslaved person less desirable financially. We can look at, so I was talking to a teacher, and she's in the audience today, Amy Jones from Norwalk, and she came up I think it was this summer. COVID kind of makes dates in my head disappear, but it was this summer she came up with her kids from Norwalk, and she's very interested in doing the project here. And I had done some preliminary research on enslaved people in Norwalk, looking at the 1790 census. Of course, the 1790 census, Norwalk, I think New Canaan, Darien, and Wilton, and Stamford are all together. Luckily, they're not jumbled together, they're just together. So in that census, we see that for that jumbled community, there's 113 enslaved people according to the 1790 census. And we can see, and that's this number here on the right. On the left, I focused on the Benedict family because they showed up as enslavers a couple of times. And I think there's a Deacon Benedict, which I have here, which I presume is this person, which is holding 3 people enslaved. And he also has 3 people of color working, free people of color working for him. My research would tell me that they probably had been enslaved too. So he has, we'll just say 3 to 6, he's held 3 to 6 people in captivity, probably over his lifetime, if not more. So we can see that if we were to do the Witness Stones project in Norwalk, in a Deacon Nathaniel Benedict's house, or we know where it's standing, or there isn't a mall there now or something, that might be a good place to think about putting a Witness Stones memorial, or look at information at the Norwalk Historical Society or the Norwalk Congregational Church to see if there's information about him there. Now, a very interesting person that I found was John Cannon, and he held 1 enslaved person in captivity in 1790. And I've been doing some work with Professor Benton from John Jay, not just starting to do some work, and he's putting together a Northeast Slavery Registry Index for the entire Northeast. And being part of that consortium, he shared with us the Nova Scotia Book of Negroes. And again, I could do 5 slides on that, but I'm not going to. But what I'm going to do is jump backward just a little. So we're looking at John Cannon. The Nova Scotia Book of Negroes is a book of runaway Blacks, free Blacks, or Blacks who fought in the American Revolution for the British, who were brought by Sir Guy Culleton, not Culleton, but Culleton, to Nova Scotia at the end of the American Revolution. We could see 31 July 1783. He's bringing ships full of African and African Americans to Nova Scotia who ran away, were free and fought for the British, ran away, fought for the British, or just ran away. And one of the pieces there that I just recently found that says, Cato Cannon, 40, short, stout fellow, formerly slave of John Cannon, Norwalk, New England, left him about 6 years ago. So here we have a story of Cato Cannon, who was enslaved by John Cannon, who still held somebody in captivity in 1790, ran away and ended up in Canada. And wouldn't that be a wonderful story to flesh out? There's just so many levels of interest and opportunities and to do a project. But so the Benedicts might be a place to do it, but this John Cannon, if we know more about him and who Cato is, what a great opportunity in Norwalk. And that's a unique story. That's a story unique to Norwalk. So really cool stuff. Just going, quickly, if slavery was critical, if we believe slavery was critical to the development of our country, if slavery shaped our beliefs about race in our country, if slavery was the main cause of the Civil War, if the enslaved resisted their bonds and still contributed to the growth of our country, how can we remember and restore their history today? And what we do is with the Witness Stones project, we were inspired by the Stolperstein project in Germany. My friend Doug Nygren came back from Germany after he had previously heard me speak at the local library and said, could we remember the enslaved the way Germans remembered where Jews lived freely before they were kidnapped and murdered under the Holocaust? And I had been teaching 8th grade for about 20 years and had about 10 years of research. And I said, yes. And that's how we developed our project. We got a blessing from the Germans, from the Stolperstein project, to say, we understand the connection, we understand the relationship between slavery and transatlantic slave trade and the Holocaust, so go for it. So we have been. So our project, our mission is through research, education, civic engagement. The Witness Stones project seeks to restore the history and honor the humanity of enslaved individuals who helped build our communities. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're bringing to the students. That's what we're teaching the teachers to bring to the students. Students' activities, we do a jigsaw activity. If you're a teacher, each group of kids take one topic, or in this case, one theme, and they become the experts at it and share it with each other, putting the jigsaw pieces together and creating a full puzzle. Our recurring themes are dehumanization, or the enslaved as property, the treatment of enslaved, paternalism, economics of slavery, and most important is human agency and resistance. How did the enslaved show their agency within the confines of slavery? Here's a story of dehumanization. We can see in this document, if we had more time, and there'll be a recording of this, but you can see that that Tamar was sold from the Loomis family to the Smith family here, to Comfort Smith. And we can see that, and on the right, we see a stone that we're putting together to install in Suffield, Connecticut, to remember Tamar. Now, Tamar's story ties into the story of Venture Smith, because Venture Smith's son, Solomon, purchased Tamar after he married her and brought her to East Haddam. And the story continues, and we're still working on trying to tell that story. Treatment of enslaved in the North, if you listen to white owners and historians, it was lenient with many freedoms, paternalistic treatment as part of the family. If you read what the enslaved people said, including in Connecticut, Venture Smith, James Morris, Jeffrey Brace, and Gad Asher, whose grandson told this story, they talk about whippings, beatings, and hog tyings, double crossings and cheatings, abandonment of the age, youth sold south, severe punishments for minor crimes. That's not the slavery if we even were taught about slavery in the North. This isn't what we were taught, because we were listening to the white owners and historians, not the enslaved people themselves. That's why these narratives are so precious to us. What is human agency? Human agency is how one displays their desire to take control of their lives. Agency can come in the form of resistance. It can also be demonstrated through one's capacity to control their own circumstances. Dan Broyle from Central Connecticut State University gave a great presentation recently. We talked about these different forms of resistance and other forms of agency. So we have from Norwalk, we have a runaway ad that a Negro wench named Nell ran away with her 3-month-old child. And who was she held and kept? Walter Dowdall was the owner, and he lives in Belfield within 3 miles of Norwalk. So I presume that's within the town itself. But this is an example of a runaway ad for a person showing their agency. Nell, she was going to try to get away and bring her child with her. Showing agencies through past and present success. We have been able to show one family of enslaved people, and I'm going to be speaking on Saturday before the Connecticut Association of Genealogists, talking about 11 generations of a family. Lieutenant Colonel Bertram Wadsworth Wilson was the 8th generation. He was a Tuskegee Airman, fought in 3 wars. His 3rd or 4th grade uncle was Moses, who was a king of slaves in Guilford. His daughters recently was State Representative Patricia Wilson Phineas, who's also the co-chair of the Witness Stones Board. So if you want to hear more about that family, that's coming up on Saturday. And we do teacher workshops. I think I'm going to just go up a little bit, but we do teacher workshops for teachers, teaching them about Northern slavery, the West India trade, the 5 themes, and then specifically about the enslaved person in your community. So this project is custom to your community because we want your kids to tell stories about enslaved people in your community. That's the power. It's the kids. The kids make it special. Black lives have always mattered. We're working in Guilford and Madison, Greenwich Historical Society with Greenwich Academy and Sacred Heart, Greenwich, Old Lyme schools with members of a committee that was formed in Old Lyme to bring the Witness Stones project to their students. Hopewell Valley, New Jersey, with the Stroudsburg Sauerland. Should be another S there. Stroudsburg Sauerland African American Museum at Norfolk, Connecticut, with the students from Salisbury School and Simsbury, and at Suffield Academy, and Killingly and West Hartford schools, with the New Haven Museum and Foot and Cold Spring schools, historic Deerfield, Massachusetts, and we're going to be opening soon at a state university near you. We're going to have a Witness Stone Center soon at the Central Connecticut State University. And finally, the learning outcomes. We want students to be consumers and producers of information literacy. We want them to be able to collaborate and communicate. We want them to present individual and shared understandings and build the foundation to discuss hard history towards a path of truth and reconciliation. We can't have reconciliation without truth. I think our country over and over again tries to skip that part. And this is the part. If you want to understand why Black Lives Matter issues are occurring in Connecticut, is because slavery occurred in Connecticut. And the poor treatment of African Americans, freed and enslaved, is what's the basis of the issues here. New vice president, when she was nominated as a Democratic candidate for the vice presidency, she said there is no vaccine for racism. We have to do the work. The Witness Stones Project is asking the communities, the teachers, and the students to do the work to help understand and find the truth so we can begin the reconciliation. And I'm gonna hand it back.
Hi, should I just start?
Yes, Kathy, go right ahead.
All right. Well, certainly following Dennis is a tall order, and the Witness Stones Project is just wonderful. The CCSU History Department, of which I am chair, is very happy to be welcoming them as a community partner into our actual history suite. What I'd like to do today is to share with you the project that I did for the Ancient Burying Ground Association. Ty Tryon, who is the president of the Ancient Burying Ground Association, put out a call for proposals in 2018 to see who could document, if people could document the African and Native people buried in the ancient burying ground in Hartford. And what my team, made up of Central Connecticut State University alums, students, graduate students, and faculty, proposed was to create a website that I'm going to show you right now, that would contain a database of all of the people of color buried in the ancient burying ground between 1640 and 1815, when the cemetery was still accepting burials, and that we would create a memorial for each person that we could find a record for. So we have a list of people, and we have for each person an Ancestry.com family tree, information, demographic information about them, who their master or mistress was. And you heard Dennis use the term enslaved and enslaver. We did not use the term enslaver, partly because we weren't sure necessarily always who the first enslaver was. And the term master or mistress is still used in law. That is, the master-servant relationship is still used in law today, often changed to employer-employee, but sometimes not. We documented additional relationships. And then we also have something called relationship tree, which I'll explain in a moment. We documented places of residence because sometimes people from outside of Hartford died in Hartford and were buried in the burying ground. And then we have a confidence level. Are we very sure, somewhat confident, slightly confident, or not confident that someone we found was buried in the burying ground? So let me take you to the relationship trees. Probably a lot of you have used Ancestry.com. But the problem with Ancestry.com is that you need to know exactly how somebody is related to somebody else. And what I found as a genealogist of the Wangunk people, the native people of Hartford and Middletown and Haddam, on down even to Old Lyme, what I found as a genealogist in that is I often could not say, is this a paternal uncle or a maternal aunt? What I had to figure out was social relationships. We also could not document the master-slave relationship, which of course was for enslaved people and often for masters, one of the central aspects of their lives. So some computer science students and I invented relationship tree. And it allows you to make a tree that explains the relationships between people. So in this case, Barney was kept in the jail in Hartford. He was in jail with Kate and with Jack. Kate was in jail for killing her infant. The Reverend Daniel Wadsworth visited the jail, and he talked to Kate and Barney and Jack while they were all in prison. So relationship tree is a big part of the project at the burying ground. And we hope to keep refining this program, and it is available if you want to have an account. You can have an account and set it up, but there is no help desk. So I'll just warn you about that. We haven't gotten that far yet. So now I'd like to go to a PowerPoint presentation. I hope you will all examine the features of the website yourself and look at our ancient burying ground features, from the narratives to the report to the downloadable database that has over 500 people now documented in it. And you can download this database, and if you want to keep different information, you can add columns, export it into Excel or anything else, and work with it yourselves. Okay. Pardon me for not being real facile with the share button here. So the ancient burying ground is in downtown Hartford, and right in the center of town, and it's now next to Center Church and sort of behind a bus stop. And often people don't even notice that it's there. It is, in the present day, pretty much a memorial to the white founders and settlers who came to the area. This memorial is right in the heart of the ancient burying ground. Samuel Stone admonishes people as they come by and wait for the bus or sit in the park. And it definitely has the feel of the white Puritan settlers. But something close to about 6,000 people were originally buried in that burying ground. Only about 415 markers or so still exist. None exist for the Native or African people who were buried there. So Dennis has done a great job of showing you the kinds of records that are available. And so I won't spend a lot of time going into that, but we had to find the sources, and we went to microfilm sources at the Connecticut State Library. We looked at account books where we found, where we found, for example, an account that showed the burial of Philip Moore Jr. and the cost of his coffin and the cost of digging his grave. We found census records, court records, probate records, and other documents. And from there, we built the database. And then from there, we also filled out some of the stories. A lot of my research, even before I started the Ancient Burying Ground Project, was on the Wangunk, and in particular, the family of the One Pennies. The Sachem One Penny was from the Wethersfield area. Sarah One Penny was his daughter, and she was also the daughter of Sapunamo, a fact that is really not known, because after the Pequot War, which drew a lot of attention from scholars, interest in the Wangunk waned. And because of the way in which the Connecticut colony marginalized the Wangunk sachems like Soeg, who moved to Middletown. The genealogy of the Wangunk was not kept in the same way that the Mohegans and the Pequots kept theirs. So I'm trying to restore this. And the one pennies are interesting because of all of the native wills that exist in the state of Connecticut, almost all can be traced to some relationship with the Wangunk, and in particular, Sarah One Penny and her colonial master, but also someone who cared for her grandson, Scipio Two Shoes, a man named William Whiting. So I won't tell you the story here because we're short on time, but it is a fascinating story and I have written about it elsewhere. And if you're interested in reading my articles, they are online under my name at academia.edu. I do want to spend a little bit of time on the story of Ruth and Philip Moore because they were two of the most prominent they were a prominent African-American couple with children who all left probated estates. Philip and Ruth both had wills. Their son, Philip Jr., had a probated estate. They had children, they owned land. It's that the land that they own is probably over by Goodwin College right now. And they certainly deserve a marker. I'm hoping the Witness Stones Project will get to them eventually and put a marker there. But they were an extraordinary family. We don't know how Philip came by his land. He seems to have taken possession in 1676. That suggests perhaps that he was a veteran of King Philip's War and earned this land in some way. But the family did eventually fall on hard times by the third generation. And you can see here that we have an Ancestry.com tree. We're continuing to fill this out. Philip's children, Philip Moore Jr. and Susanna Moore, also had children. From there, we can follow the grandchildren. John Moore quitclaimed his father's land in 1717 when it was rumored in Connecticut that African Americans would no longer be able to hold land. And we don't know if he did that because he was in debt, if he were afraid of the law, or just what the problem was. His wife, Lydia, may have been Black, or she may have been Native, or a combination thereof. We find a lot of Lydias in the subsequent records. And there was a Lydia who was an Indian and a widow in 1710, so could have been her. Her children were all baptized. They were members of the Congregational Church in Hartford, but Sarah Moore was the one who especially fell on hard times. She was put on the town dole, and she and her children were on welfare. Her children are the last known reference to any members of the Moore family. The Lords and the Woodbridges. So Timothy Woodbridge was the Reverend in the First Church of Hartford. He was also a president of Yale College in New Haven. And according to the Yale website, he owned an Indian boy and some Negro slaves. Well, if we look here at the relationship tree, we can see that he owned a lot more than some slaves. He bought the indentures of a number of Native people who were in debt to the colony or to other colonists. He bought them, then he used up the labor. And of course, if it was an indenture, he would eventually have to set them free. But often indentures could be extended because the indentured person broke a law or broke a rule, and they could go back to court and have the indentures extended. He was married to Abigail Lord Woodbridge, Abigail had been married previously to Richard Lord, who owned the cabbage tree plantation that you see here in Antigua. And she brought a number of enslaved people to the marriage. So you can really see how absolutely extensive this is. The records, the published records of the Hartford First Church list some enslaved people, certainly not all. And when they do, they make a point of noting when enslaved people were baptized. And it always says for Abigail Lord that she had them baptized to further educate them in the Christian faith. But we should note that several of the people that she owned were families, and those families were split apart. So Tamar and Andrew, who were a married couple, were given as a gift to her son when he got married. Their child Daniel was also given as a gift, but the girls, the daughters, Lydia and Isabel, were split up. Lydia was eventually willed as a bequest to Woodbridge's daughter, who had moved away. And so they were given and sold and bequested right out of the family. There were a number of interesting stories here, and I won't go too much into this one, but Joseph Deuce is from a family that became quite well known because Abda sued for his freedom based on the fact that his mother had been coupled with a white man. And so Abda's father was white. And when I say coupled with, I say that because the court viewed her as engaging in fornication with this white man. In reality, she was probably raped. And I say that because 2 white men were accused of having sex with her at the same time. But this guy, Joseph Jennings, was supposed to be, or rather John Jennings was supposed to be the father of Abda and paid support. So Abda was eventually freed. Joseph, his son, went through several guardians after Abda died and eventually died himself at the age, or rather in 1789, at the age of probably about 70 something, leaving only a lean-to in the middle of Hartford as his property and a pair of old pants. Now, this story, Samuel Gibson, is quite something, and he comes from originally the town of Guilford, so I want to include that here for Dennis. Samuel Gibson was called Mr. Gibson. He was a very prominent grocer. He advertised in all the major newspapers of the day. His obituary appeared in the Hartford Courant and several other newspapers. And he had originally been enslaved to Thomas Frisbee, who had purchased him from the West Indies. But he bought his freedom, opened a grocery store, and then employed Frisbee's son, Thomas, sorry. When Gibson died at the young age of 35, he left all of his estate to his former master's son, Thomas. And you know, these relationships beg for explanation, and I don't have one. My thought perhaps is that perhaps having any relationship, any kind of family at all, even if they were the white enslavers, was better than having nothing. And these relationships could often become quite intense and personal. But I don't know the explanation. And I think it's something that we'll probably never quite understand. Dennis already talked about the number of unnamed. This was a shocking and horrible thing as we were looking through the records. And I think that my students and I actually found we were sometimes moved to tears at seeing people who were documented as being 102 years old. Obviously, they are well known to everyone in the community, and she's just a Negro woman. And the slave trade was hugely important. Down on Market Street is buried one Norman Morrison, who traded in slaves. He often worked through the port of Newport, buying baskets from London, which he would then put on ships in Middletown that would be taken to West Africa and used as trinkets to lure in purchasers to get in the purchase of slaves. Our database has a lot of names. We keep adding to them. The only marker to the African people and African-American people buried in the ancient burying ground was erected in 1998 by middle school children who did research and found information on the Black governors and uncovered some of the names in the burying ground. And we owe these children a great deal because I think they were the inspiration to embark on this project. So thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, everyone. If you would put your questions into the chat and we can ask our presenters some questions. Thank you so much for those wonderful presentations. Dennis, you can turn on your video. Thank you. So as we're waiting for some questions to come through. There was a question on, Dennis, what are the age of those students that you are you're working with?
We're working with 5th graders all the way to 12th graders. The project, I call it the sweet spot, is probably 7th, 8th grade US history is what it was designed for. But as teachers know, you can add scaffolding or supports to information or take them away. Primary documents are not easy for adults to analyze. So we put supports in there, but if we're dealing with high school seniors, they oftentimes will get it more in the raw form than we would with younger students.
Okay. Well, we have a question. Are you familiar with the story of Caesar and Lois Peters of Hebron? And I'm not sure which one of you might know.
No.
Okay. Okay.
So that was my question.
Oh, hi, Eric.
Hiya, how you doing?
Good.
First off, great talk, you guys. Thank you very much. The story of Caesar and Lois Peters of Hebron is actually, the end result is a little bit uplifting. They were the property of the Reverend Samuel Peters of Hebron. He was a rabid Tory. When the call was put out in Connecticut to send aid to Boston, he set about trying to convince the people of Hebron to not contribute to that aid. He made himself a royal pain in the butt to the extent that he was soundly invited to leave Hebron, and he went back to England. He died in 1787 in England, and when his estate was being probated, he had as part of his property 2 slaves, Caesar and Lois Peters, who had taken the surname of their master. They were a married couple. They were set to be sent down to the Carolinas to be sold off as property. Marshals were dispatched to take them prisoner, and they were taken to Norwich to be put on board a ship. Well, the people of Hebron were not happy about this, and what they did is they put together an arrest warrant that superseded the seizing of Caesar and Lois. They were snatched literally almost from the gangplank of the ship. The people of Hebron set about to purchase their emancipation, and they lived out the rest of their lives in Hebron as free people.
Well, that's fascinating. Eric is one of our Norwalk Historical Society board members and also gives many lectures also. So Thank you so much for that, Eric.
Eric, I heard a story like that from that area. I thought it was a Colchester story, but that might be the one I heard because they kept the property, and it was an uplifting story. Thank you for sharing that.
All right, we have another question. Define Black governors in the cemetery.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Define Black governors in the cemetery.
Oh, okay, sure. So Connecticut and many New England states had a custom of having Black governors either elected by the African-American population in a town or even the state. And Hartford had this tradition. All but one governor was elected, one during the American Revolution was appointed. But the governors were kind of liaisons. I'm getting an echo. Is it some kind of echo? The governors were chosen by the African-American population, but they were liaisons to the white establishment. And they often settled disputes. It was a ceremonial position only. Of course, they had no legal ability to influence anything. They couldn't sign legislation or anything like that. But they were very prominent men. And there were also Black sheriffs like Neptune, who is mentioned in our database, who were also very prominent men. They were often barbers or professionals of some sort who led their community.
Thank you. Another question. What was the name of the person developing the slave index of the Northeast?
Yeah, that's Professor Ned Benton.
Okay.
From John Jay College, SUNY.
Okay. All right, another question. Can you make any direct connections between provisional farms in the Connecticut River Valley and the islands of Barbados?
I cannot, but I think that would be a great project. I do know that for example, the Bolton farm that was owned by Morrison had enslaved people from West Africa, from Senegambia in particular, living on it because they are documented in his estate in the probate records.
All right, another question. When renaming places, how do you choose between the indigenous, Black, or white colonist name?
I'll try that one. I think it's a community decision. In Brantford, when they renamed the rocks off the coast of Brantford, it was a community decision. I think students were involved with that too. So it was something that was brought up to the community. Somebody noticed on a map that the name that was doesn't seem to be appropriate. It isn't appropriate today, and so I think a community is a great way of doing it. I think. Well, there's choices. Some areas they have places called like Little Africa now, or Little Liberia, or something like that, which is a nice way to, instead of erasing, remembering a name of the people who are there, right? Because some of our communities, the free Blacks left our communities sometime in the 19th century.
Absolutely, and you're talking about a Little Liberia in Bridgeport. Yeah, exactly. Was the Lord family the same that settled Silver Mine in Norwalk, Connecticut?
I don't know the answer to that. But if you go on our Lord family genealogy tree on Ancestry.com, for which we have a link in the database, you may be able to see. I'm just not sure.
All right, this one's for Dennis. Were you talking about a deacon, Nathaniel Benedict, in 1806? He says, we have a number of slave owners in Pine Island Cemetery in Norwalk.
I was talking about Nathaniel Benedict, and he was evident in the 1790 and 1800 census. So I didn't travel much further down the path of that, but thank you for the clue. So I'll find out where the Pine Island Cemetery is, and that might be a starting point for doing a project in Norwalk. Thank you.
Yeah, that question came from Holly Kazone, and she does a lot of research in the cemeteries and here in Norwalk, so she's quite familiar. So it triggered something for her. And I am seeing, we're putting some links out. I'm curious about a memorial honoring the nameless slaves of Connecticut. Are there any plans or petitions to make an updated one with your research? Who would be the best person to contact about this?
That's a tough question. I think that probably someone at the old State House would be a good person to contact. If there were to be a memorial, that might be a logical place to put it. Certainly the nameless enslaved are so numerous, and we do owe them something, I think. So that would be a wonderful thing. I would be happy to support it, and you can find my email on the CCSU History Department website, but I'll also put it in the chat.
I just recently had a discussion with somebody from the Historical Society in Clinton about the same topic, and we usually try to focus on telling the stories and talking about the humanity of an individual person. And she said, what about if you don't know the name? And all of a sudden it stopped, and I could just feel myself tingle, having been in the military, where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is so powerful because of all the stories that are buried there. And I think, you know, what that questioner had, it is such a powerful thought, because our green in Guilford is where probably most of the enslaved people are buried without a single marker. And so how could, you know, so it's kind of like a infinite possibility, like the flame of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier just burns forever. So anyway, very powerful thought.
You never know where that may go. The Norwalk Indians were mentioned. Were they Muncie, Delaware, Sewanee, Illinois, or Pecusset? And it continues, I believe a Mohawk grave was also found in Norwalk. Would you know whether the Norwalk Indians pay tribute, wampum, to both the Mohawks and the Pequots?
Well, I'm going to direct you to a book by Lucy Ann Lavin at the Institute for American Indian Studies. It's called Connecticut's Indigenous People. I'll write it in the chat when I finish talking. And she and Lori Weinstein of Western Connecticut State University are actually working on a project right now about the Native people in Fairfield County, because who they are is actually quite mysterious in some ways, at least early on. They seem to have come from New Jersey in part. The Pegussets, of course, live there now. They probably are Muncie. But I think that there's a lot more work to be done, because let me tell you that there's so much misunderstanding of who the indigenous people were in Connecticut. You have people using place names for tribal names, and you know, and a lot needs to be sorted out.
What are the 5 themes of slavery?
Okay, thank you. And this is something we developed using all the documentation we had, and how do we get people to understand. But the first theme is dehumanization. The second one is treatment of enslaved. And even though that's part of dehumanization, we have to break the myth that slavery was good in the North. Slavery was lenient, or slavery was okay. And I think Kathy did a great job of talking about how women were treated, and how the children of enslaved women were oftentimes mixed race, and the children were sold away. The third theme is paternalism, and paternalism is something kids certainly understand. And when we talk to indigenous people, they understand about their treatment. And for the enslaved people, they never became, and oftentimes for free blacks during that time period, never became adults in society. The fourth part is economics of slavery. The sad thing is if you take enough economics courses, it taints the way you view the world because everything seems to be about money. Well, slavery in the long run, even freeing enslaved people oftentimes benefited the enslaver by having them not be liable for the enslaved person in their old age. And the most important is agency and resistance. That was shared with me by Margie Shapiro from the Anti-Defamation League. She said, if you're telling the story and you don't talk about the humanity of the enslaved person, then you're just re-enslaving them, you're re-victimizing them. And that's really the top, it's the most important thing, but it comes after the other things happen too. So those are the 5 themes. And if you go to our website, or when you get a copy of they can come back to your website and see the slideshow that's listed there.
Great. Another question. I have enjoyed teaching The Witch of Blackbird Pond, centered in Wethersfield. Do you have any background on African or Native peoples there?
Yes, actually. So the sachem of Wethersfield was a man named Turramuggus. I'm going to write his name in the chat. He was part of the great Wangung sachem's family, Soweig. Soweig lived primarily in Middletown. Sequossen was Soweig's son who lived in Hartford and invited the colonists to come and settle there. Turramuggus was his brother. And Turramuggus had a son named Petaju, who was active in both Wethersfield and Farmington. And so Wethersfield has a long history, a long Wangung history. They also have a very well-established African-American population. There are some African-American graves in the cemetery there. And if you go to the town hall, you can find some very interesting stories in the town records.
Great, wonderful. Has any of your research led into discussions regarding reparations?
I'll answer that a little bit. And when we first started installing the stones in Guilford, this friend of mine, Brad Leet, who's 14th generation in Guilford, he's a stonemason. He was putting the stones in the ground. And I said to Brad, I said, can we pay you to do this? He says, well, my family were enslavers. And I said, I haven't found a Leet as enslavers, and even, Governor Leet and things like that. And he goes, I'm a Chittenden too. So Brad took on the responsibility to do this as a he didn't use the R word, reparations, but then I recently have been contacted by the Chittenden, like this extended Chittenden family that's, some of them are in Canada, some of them are on the West Coast of the United States, and they want to get involved with the project. And I had a woman, Pauline Merrick from Ontario, send money because she knows that she's a descendant of enslavers in Connecticut and she wanted to help our project do it. So I'm seeing little pieces. We're not advertising that, but there are people who when they're on Ancestry and all of a sudden they stumble across their ancestors as being enslavers, I'm getting more and more of those folks coming to the Witness Stones Project and saying, what can we do to help? So it's a lovely thing to see, and but we're not diving deep, we'll say.
All right. Are there any enslaved narratives from Norwalk? Because I'm not sure if you come this far down.
Kathy, you can please correct me, but the only narratives that we have that I know of in Connecticut are James Mars, Venture Smith, and Jeffrey Brace. He's from Milford, Woodbridge area. And we use something by the grandson of Gad Asher, writes about Gad Asher's enslavement. And it's important because there's not many people of color writing about slavery. So the grandson of an enslaved person is going to tell us a better story than someone who's trying to tell a different story. But Kathy can correct me. Most of the narratives we have in Connecticut are from people like Grimes, I forget his first name. His narrative, he was enslaved in the South and he came north for his freedom. So he can't tell you what slavery was like in Connecticut. He can tell you what being a free Black was like in Connecticut, but he can't tell you what slavery was like in Connecticut.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Is there any thought of doing an archaeological dig in Guilford, on the Guilford Green, to find graves?
I gotta see if there's anybody in Guilford in the audience, but no. The Greens are very are a sacred place on many levels, and I would guess the answer is going to be no. In the 1930s, the president of Yale was going up the Post Road, and he said the Guilford Green, the cows are pooping on the gravestones, and there's a swamp, and there's a market there. It should be a garden, so now it's more of a park. The stones were taken off the green, but the prominent stones you can find on cemeteries on the east and west part of town, but you can't find any remnants of the enslaved people. But there's a lot of everybody buried on the green, all the way from 1639 to 1830. So almost 200 years of burials, like the New Haven Green and places like that. But I think the New Haven Green, we also understand that that's where the majority of the enslaved people in New Haven are probably buried.
Great. I think we're at the end of our questions and answers. Thank you so much for being here and participating. It's been wonderful. I think we've all learned a lot, and maybe we'll have some of the projects come into some of our audiences, communities. You may be getting a bunch of emails and phone calls right after this. And I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight. We hope you will join the Norwalk Historical Society for some of our upcoming events. We are going to have an event on March 4th on the oystering in Norwalk, Connecticut, which is a virtual chat with photographer Bill Whitbeck. And then on March 25th, we are going to have a Women's History Month lecture, Giving Entertainment to Satan. Witchcraft and Witch, Persecution in Early New England. That should be very interesting. So please visit our website at norwalkhistoricalsociety.org to register for any events. We'll probably be posting this talk on our website, Facebook. We'll send out anybody who's registered for this event. We will send any additional links in our email. So don't worry, because there's a lot of questions about what people want to see this recording, because it's been very, very interesting. So I want to thank everyone and wish everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you.